The hide was frozen stiff when I pulled it from the drying rack. January cold, the kind that splits wood and turns breath to smoke before it clears your teeth. I was working the edge of it with a rib bone scraper, alone, which was how I preferred it by then. My hands knew the work, and my mind was somewhere far off. The way it goes when you have lived enough years that the body keeps moving while the spirit wanders. That was when I heard the dog. Not one of ours. Ours were silent dogs, trained to watch and wait. This was a sound like tearing, a high, yipping that came from the tree line south of the river. I set the hide down and listened. The sound came again, and under it, something else. A voice. Human, but barely. I did not take a weapon. I don't know why. Maybe because the sound was too ragged to be a trick and too weak to be a threat. I walked through the snow toward the cottonwoods, with nothing but my hands, and the scraper still in one of them forgotten. She was face down in the drift, where the bank drops off before the water. The dog, some short-legged, half-starved thing with a torn ear, was circling her and crying. It would not come near me, but it would not leave her either. That told me something about the woman before I ever saw her face. I turned her over. The left side was burns. Old burns, long-healed. The skin had gone tight and shiny, the way fire does when it takes deep. From the temple down past the jaw, pulling the corner of her mouth, twisting the eyelid so it didn't close right. Her hair on that side was gone in patches, grown back thin and wrong. The right side of her face was untouched. A young woman's face, pale, with a jaw that even slack and half-frozen had a set to it. Coat was a man's coat, too big the elbows worn through. Under it she had a cotton dress and nothing else. No gloves. Fingers were white and hard. She was breathing, but only just. That shallow, rapid thing the body does when it's deciding whether to keep trying. I picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. The dog followed. I need to say something about the camp then, because it matters. We were 37 people. What was left of a band that had once been 200 before the soldiers, and the sickness, and the reservations took the rest. I was chief of 37 people on land the government had forgotten about or hadn't gotten around to taking yet. A creek valley in the Black Hills, timber on 3 sides, good water, hard to find if you didn't know where to look. We stayed because leaving meant the reservation, and the reservation meant death by a different name. I was 41 years old. My wife, Tawiella, had died 3 winters fevers or of the coughing sickness. My son was 12. My mother was still alive then, and she ran the camp the way she always had, with a look that could stop a man mid-stride and a memory that held every slight and every kindness anyone had ever done. She was the first to see me come back carrying the white woman. "What is that?" she said. Not a question. A challenge. "A woman," I said. "Half dead. I can see what she is. Then you can see she needs a fire and warm water." My mother looked at the burned face. Looked at me. She had buried a daughter-in-law and watched me go quiet in the years since. I think she understood something in that moment that I did not understand myself, that I had found something in the snow and I was not going to back. She held the lodge flap open. Her name was Eliza Pardo, and she told me that on the 3rd day, when the fever broke and she could keep her eyes open long enough to see where she was, she said it flat, like someone giving testimony, name, then silence waiting to see what it would cost her. "You are in my lodge," I said. "You are safe." She looked at the hides on the walls, the fire, my son asleep on his pallet. Looked at me. I watched her take in my face, my braids, the bone breastplate I wore inside. I saw the moment she understood she was with Lakota, and the moment after, when she decided it didn't matter, maybe that it was better than what she'd left. "How long?" she said. 3 days. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she said, "Dog." Eating better than he has in a long time. Something moved in her face. The good side, where the muscles could still do what they wanted. Not a smile. A release, like a rope going slack. She slept again. I sat by the fire for a long time after that, scraping the grease from a deer hide, and I tried to understand why my chest felt different. Not lighter, just occupied. Like something had moved into a room that had been empty so long I'd forgotten it was there. The story came out in pieces over weeks, the way a frozen river gives up what it's been holding. A piece here, a piece there, and you had to be patient and not reach for it. She had been a seamstress in a town called Ridger in the Nebraska Territory. Her husband had been a farrier. The fire was a lamp that fell in the night. She'd told me that part without looking at me, her hand on the scarred side of her face like she was holding it in place. Her husband died in the fire. She did not. The town decided that was her fault. Not right away. At first there was sympathy. But sympathy has a short life in a small town, and the burns made people uncomfortable. They'd look and then look away, and after a while they stopped looking at all. A woman alone, scarred, with no family. She became a thing to avoid, then a thing to blame. When the feed store burned, nothing to do with her. They came to her door. "Get out," they told her. That simple. "Get out, or we'll make you." She got out, took the dog and the coat, and walked north because north was away. That was 4 months before I found her. 4 months of towns that let her work a few days and then moved her on, sleeping in barns and under bridges. Of the scar doing its work before she ever opened her mouth. Closing doors, turning faces, making her less than human in the eyes of people who needed someone to be less than them. She told me this over many evenings, sitting by the fire while my mother pretended not to listen, and my son, Tokala, actually didn't listen because he was 12 and busy being 12. She told it without self-pity, which was the thing that caught me. She laid it out the way you lay out a hide to examine. Here is the damage. Here is what's left. This is what I have to work with. I respected that, more than respected it. I recognized it. That plainness. That refusal to dress up pain in anything but what it was. My people do the same. We lost everything. Land, buffalo, children, and we say so straight. Because wrapping sorrow in pretty words is another kind of lie, and we have been lied to enough. She asked me once, during one of those evening tellings, why I'd brought her in. Why I hadn't left her in the snow or carried her to the nearest white settlement. I thought about it. I could have said pity. I could have said duty. Both would have been partly true. The dog, I said. She waited. A dying woman with a dog that wouldn't leave her. That's either a very good woman or a very good dog, and either way I wanted to know which. She looked at the dog, asleep by the fire, his ribs still visible but less than before. Both, she said. I know that now. There was a silence after that which was different from the silences before it. Warmer. Like a hide that's been worked until the stiffness goes out. I should tell you about the first time she stood up to someone in the camp, because it changed things. There was a woman named Zitkala, Toska's sister, who had lost 2 sons to soldiers and who carried that grief like a blade. She was hard, Zitkala, in the way that broken things become hard when they heal crooked. She had made no secret of her feelings about a white woman in our camp, and most people stayed out of her way, because staying out of Zitkala's way was generally good policy. One morning in late winter, Eliza was working at the hide-scraping frames near the creek. Zitkala walked past, stopped, and said in Lakota, which Eliza could barely understand at that point, something about white women and fire and deserving what you get. Eliza didn't understand the words. She understood the tone. Everyone does. She set down the scraper, stood up straight. She was taller than Zitkala by a head, and looked at her. Just looked. Didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't back away. Held the look the way you hold ground. Zitkala stared back. 2 women who had both been burned, one by fire, one by grief. Standing in the cold and taking each other's measure, Eliza picked the scraper back up, went back to work, said nothing. Zitkala walked away, but something in the way she walked was different, slower, less certain. And that evening she left a pair of fur-lined gloves outside my mother's lodge where Eliza slept. No words with them. No explanation. But the gloves were there, and Eliza wore them every day, for the rest of the winter. And Zitkala never said another word against her. I only heard about this later. From my mother, who told it the way she told everything. As if I were slightly stupid for not already knowing. There was a problem, and the problem was me, not what you think. The problem was that I was chief, and a chief's choices are never just his own. When I brought a white woman into the camp, I brought a question that everyone had to answer, and not everyone answered the same way. My cousin Matoska was the first to say it plainly. He came to my lodge on the 5th day, when Eliza was sitting up and eating broth, and he stood outside, and called my name the way you do when you want a man to come out and hear something he won't like. A Wasitshu woman in your lodge, he said. I keep a half-dead woman alive. She is white. Soldiers look for white women. No one is looking for this one. You don't know that. He was not wrong. That was what made it hard. Matoska was a good man who had watched soldiers burn 2 camps in his lifetime. His caution came from scars as real as hers, just not visible. She stays until she can walk, I said. He looked at me for a long time. And then? I didn't answer, because I didn't have one. He walked away, and I stood in the cold, and felt the weight of what I was doing settle onto me. Not just a woman to care for, but a position to defend, people to protect, and a thing growing in my chest that I had no name for yet, and no right to. She learned fast. That was the thing about Eliza. She watched. And what she watched, she understood. And what she understood, she did. Inside of a month, she was helping my mother with the hides. Inside of 2, she was sewing moccasins, and sewing them well. Her hands knew needle and thread the way mine knew a bow, and the skill translated. My mother, who had said almost nothing to her, in those first weeks, held up a pair of moccasins. Eliza had finished and examined the stitching and said, "Good." And that was the beginning of something between them that I never fully understood, but was grateful for. Tokala was easier. He was 12. She was cute and interesting. And she didn't talk to him like a child. He showed her how to set snares. And she showed him how to do a blanket stitch. And they had an understanding that required no discussion of politics or history, or the weight of what her being here meant. The camp was harder. Some people followed Matoska's worry. Others saw a woman who worked hard and caused no trouble, and decided that was enough. Old Unsi Hopa, who had medicine knowledge and very little patience, examined Eliza's scars one morning, without asking, and told her, "The fire wanted you, but didn't get all of you. That means something." Eliza didn't ask what it meant. I think she already knew, or was starting to. I watched all of this the way a chief has to. From a little distance, seeing the whole shape of it, where she fit and where she didn't. How the camp shifted around her, like water, around a new stone, finding the way to flow. What I didn't watch, because I couldn't afford to, was what was happening in myself. The first time she touched me, it was an accident. We were stretching a hide on the frame, a big elk hide, needed 4 hands. And I was holding 2 corners while she laced the thong through the peg holes. Her fingers brushed the inside of my wrist, just that. A touch that lasted less than a breath. She pulled her hand back fast, like she'd touched the fire. I kept holding the hide. My wrist burned where she'd touched it, and I thought, this is a problem. Because a chief does not take a woman out of obligation or loneliness. A chief takes a woman because the people will be stronger for it. And I could make that argument. She worked hard. She brought skills. But I would have been lying. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. I wanted her near me. I wanted to hear her voice at the fire in the evening, telling Tokala about the towns she'd seen. I wanted to watch her hands on the needlework, and sure. I wanted to be the person she looked at when she was trying to understand something about this life, this place, these people. I wanted to be needed by her in a way I hadn't been needed since Tawiela died. That was the dangerous part. Not the wanting, the needing to be needed. A man can mistake that for love, and a chief can't afford the mistake. So I kept my distance. I moved her to my mother's lodge, which was proper and which my mother accepted, with a look that said, she knew exactly why I was doing it, and thought, I was a fool. I spoke to her the way I spoke to everyone. Evenly, with respect, nothing more. I did my work and she did hers and the winter went on. Matoska trouble on a morning in February, and he didn't bring it alone. 3 men rode into the valley. White men. They weren't soldiers. Worse, in a way. They were the kind of men who exist on the edge of things, who follow rumors and call it scouting, treat a gun as a credential. They'd come up from the south following trapper tracks and found our valley by bad luck. I met them at the edge of camp with Matoska and 2 others. Their leader was a man with a red beard and a cavalry coat that wasn't his. He looked at us the way such men always looked, calculating what we had and what it would take. "We're just passing through," he said, and I knew he was lying by the way his eyes moved over the lodges, counting. "Pass through, then," I said, in English, and I saw the surprise on his face. My English was better than his. Missionaries had taught me when I was young, before I understood what they were really teaching. He didn't pass through. He and his men made camp a half-mile from ours, and that night I set watchers and told the women to stay inside. Eliza came to me, to my mother's lodge, where I was checking on them, and I saw in her face a fear I hadn't seen since the first day. "They'll see me," she said. "They'll talk. They will see nothing. You don't understand. If they see a white woman here, they'll bring soldiers. They'll say you took me." She was right. I knew she was right. And she knew I knew. And we stood there, in my mother's lodge with the fire between us and the full weight of what her being here could cost pressing down on both of us. "Then they won't see you," I said. She shook her head. "I should go. I should leave before they." "No." I said it harder than I meant to. She stopped. My mother behind her stopped. Even the fire seemed to hold still. "Came to me half dead in the snow," I said. "I did not keep you alive so you could walk back into it. It's your people who'll pay. My people are my concern. That's why you are my concern, too." I had not planned to say it. The words came out of the place in my chest that I'd been guarding, and once they were in the air, I couldn't take them back. I didn't want to. Eliza looked at me across the fire, and I saw something shift in her face. Both sides, the smooth and the scarred. The same expression on both, which was rare, because the burned side usually lagged behind, like a translation arriving late. But this time they moved together. She didn't say anything. She sat down by the fire. She picked up the moccasin she'd been working on. She stayed. My mother turned to her hides and said nothing, but I saw the edge of her mouth move. The men with the red-bearded leader stayed 3 days. On the second day, one of them wandered close to camp, and Matoska walked him back at arrow point, which was the right thing to do, and which I would have done myself. On the third day, I went to their camp alone. I know what you're thinking, that it was reckless. Maybe it was. But a chief doesn't hide behind his people, and some things are settled by one man standing in front of another, and making clear how it will be. Redbeard was sitting by his fire, cleaning a rifle that was too good for him. Taken off a dead man, most likely. His 2 companions were behind him. All 3 looked at me, and I saw them do the math. 1 Lakota, 3 of them, the rifles. "You'll leave today," I said. He smiled. The smile of a man who has guns and thinks that's the same as being strong. "What if we don't?" "Then one of us will bury the other 3. 3-1, Chief." "I know. I'm sorry for you." I wasn't performing. I meant it the way I said it. Plainly, like a fact about the weather. It killed men before, and the look of a man who has, and a man who is willing to again is something you can't fake. Redbeard saw it. His smile went small and then went away. "There's good land south of here," I said. "Go find it." They left before noon. I watched them ride out of the valley, and I stood there until they were small and then gone. And then I went back to camp and sat down, and my hands shook for half an hour. Not from fear, from the weight of what I'd been willing to do, and what it would have meant. Eliza found me later, sitting behind my lodge where nobody could see the shaking. She didn't say anything about it. She sat down next to me, closer than she ever had, and we watched the valley darken together. After a while she said, "You're a good man." 3 words. The simplest thing. She said them, like she was laying a stone on a foundation. careful and sure, and I felt each one land. Spring came the way it does in the hills. Sudden, violent, everything happening at once. Snow melting into mud, creeks running fast and brown, first green coming through so bright it hurt to look at. My people came alive with it. After a winter of holding still, there was work everywhere. Lodges to repair, meat to hunt, horses to find. Eliza worked alongside the women now as though she'd been born to it. Skin had darkened from the fire and the weather. And, in the right light, dressed in deerskin my mother had made her, she looked like she belonged. She didn't. Not all the way, not yet. But the gap was closing, and the camp had begun to accept the closing of it. Matoska was the last holdout. He watched her with careful eyes and said nothing, which for Matoska was the same as disapproval. One afternoon in April, I found him repairing a fish trap by the creek and sat down beside him. We worked in silence for a while. His silence, not mine. I was waiting for him to be ready. "She's strong," he said finally. "Yes. She works hard." "Yes." He tied off a willow branch, tested the joint. "The men who came, they'll talk. Others will come. Maybe. You'll fight them, if I have to." He looked at me then. Really looked. The way he had when we were boys, and I'd done something he thought was brave and stupid in equal measure. "You are my chief," he said. "Where you stand, I stand. Even if it's in front of a burned woman from Nebraska." I laughed. I hadn't laughed in, I don't know, a long time. It came out rusty and wrong, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years, and Matoska stared at me, and then he laughed too. And we sat by the creek, laughing like boys, while the water ran fast beside us. I courted her the Lakota way, which means I didn't court her at all. Not with words, not with declarations or promises, or any of the things I've been told white men do. I built things. A drying rack for the hides she worked. Then a better frame for stretching them, with joints pegged tight so it wouldn't wobble. A bench outside my mother's lodge where she sat in the evenings. A pair of winter moccasins lined with rabbit fur, not beautiful. My hands are better with a bow than a needle, but warm. Each thing left where she'd find it. No explanation. Each thing saying what I couldn't. She understood. Of course she did. Eliza understood everything, watched everything, missed nothing. She knew what the moccasins meant. She knew what the bench meant. She began leaving things in return. A shirt she'd sewn from deerskin, the stitches so fine and even they looked like they'd been drawn with a pen. A beaded band for my hair. She'd learned the beadwork from Unsi Hopa, and the pattern was Lakota, but the precision was a seamstress's, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever been given. She left it on my pallet, folded, with nothing to mark it but the work itself. Tokala noticed before anyone. He came to me one evening with the directness of a 12-year-old and said, "Are you going to marry Eliza? What makes you ask that? You smile now, you didn't used to. Children see everything. Would that be all right with you?" I said. He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything. "She's teaching me to read," he said. "English words. If she married you, she wouldn't leave. The reason? She also makes good soup." I put my hand on his head and he let me, which at 12 was a gift. I asked her on a night in May, when the air was warm enough to sit outside and the sky was so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled them. We were sitting on the bench I'd built her, and the camp was quiet around us. Just the sound of the creek and the dogs and someone's child fussing in a distant lodge. I didn't plan it. I had planned it many times. It's me, lying awake in my lodge composing words, in both languages, and rejecting all of them. But when the moment came, the plans fell away and what was left was just the truth. "I want you to stay," I said. She was looking at the sky. She didn't look at me yet. Not as a guest, not as someone my mother takes care of, as mine, and I as yours. Now she looked. The stars were bright enough that I could see both sides of her face. The smooth and the scarred, both equally hers. Both equally the woman I wanted. "You're a chief," she said. "I'm a burned white woman with nothing. You have a dog." She almost smiled. "I have a dog. And you have hands that make the best moccasins in this camp." which my mother will never forgive you for. And you have a boy who thinks your soup is reason enough to keep you. And you have me, if you want me. Your people, my people see what I see. Do you see? I had thought about this. Not the words. The words were always going to be wrong, too small for the thing, but the truth of it. What I saw when I looked at her. I see a woman the fire tried to take and couldn't. A woman a whole town threw out, who walked 4 months through winter and didn't stop. A woman who learned a new life in a new language among an new people and made herself useful inside of a season. I see the strongest person in this valley, and I am asking her to stand with me because I am better when she's near. She was quiet for a long time. The dog, that same short-legged, torn-eared dog who'd led me to her, was lying at her feet, and she reached down and put her hand on his head the way she did when she was thinking. "The town that burned me," she said. "They said I was cursed. They said the fire followed me. They said no one would ever." She stopped, started again. "They said a lot of things about what I deserved and what I'd never have. They were wrong." "Yes." She turned to me. She put her hand on my face, her hand on my jaw, her fingers light, and she looked at me the way I had seen Tawila look at me once, a long time ago, and also the way no one had ever looked at me, because it was Eliza's look and it belonged only to her. "Yes," she said again, and this time it was the answer. "We married according to our way. My mother oversaw it, which meant it was done properly and with considerable commentary. Eliza wore a dress of white deerskin that the women had made for her. Even Matoska's wife had contributed beadwork, which was Matoska's blessing delivered through the only person he couldn't argue with. The camp gathered. 37. 38, with Eliza. 38 people in a valley in the Black Hills. The last. Free band of a nation that had once filled the plains, and in the middle of them a Lakota chief and a burned white woman, standing together, while my mother sang the old songs. I remember the firelight on her face. Both sides. The flames moved on the scarred skin, and for a moment, it looked like the fire was trying again, reaching for her, and then the light shifted. And it was just light, just warmth, and she was standing next to me, looking up at me with those steady eyes. Tokla behind us, trying to look solemn, failing. The dog sat at Eliza's feet and yawned. I will tell you what happened after, because the story doesn't end at the wedding. Stories that end there are lying. The summer was good. Eliza moved into my lodge, and the adjustment was, I won't say easy. Two people learning each other's silences and habits, learning when to speak and when to leave alone. She was neat in ways I wasn't. I was early to rise in ways she wasn't. She liked the fire banked low at night. I liked it high. She folded things. I piled them. We figured it out the way all people do, by small collisions and small repairs, until the spaces between us were the right shape. The first real argument was about the horses. I wanted to trade 2 of our mares to a Cheyenne band for a stallion with good blood, Eliza. Thought we should keep the mares because one was pregnant, and the math was better. She laid it out for me with a stick in the dirt. This many horses now, this many by spring if we keep the mares, this many if we trade. And she was right, and I knew she was right within the first 3 marks in the dirt. But I argued for another hour, because I had already told the Cheyenne I would trade, and a chief does not go back on his word. She looked at me with that look. Both sides of her face settle into the same flat expression, and you know you've lost. Send them something else, she said. 2 elk hides and the good blanket. Tell them the mares went lame. That's a lie. It's a negotiation. Your word said you'd bring something of value. Bring something of value. I sent the hides and the blanket. The Cheyenne chief sent back a message that said he liked my new wife's thinking, and could she come run his camp too? I did not tell Eliza about the second part. She taught Tokala to read through the summer. English first, from a Bible she'd carried in that too big coat, the one thing she'd taken from her old life. He learned fast. She was a good teacher, patient and demanding in equal measure, a combination that left no room for laziness. By fall, He could read aloud without stumbling, and he'd moved on to a book of natural history that a trader had exchanged for a beaver pelt. He read about animals that lived across the ocean, elephants, tigers, creatures from Africa and India, and he'd come to me with questions I couldn't answer, and I'd say, "Ask Eliza," and the two of them would sit by the fire and puzzle over things neither of them had ever seen. She learned Lakota perfectly, not quickly, but steadily, the way she learned everything, by watching and listening and refusing to be embarrassed by mistakes. The women helped her. My mother corrected her pronunciation with a relentlessness that was, I realized, a form of love. Eliza's accent never fully left, and certain sounds defeated her completely. She turned the guttural stops into something soft and round that made the children laugh. She laughed with them, which was the right thing. The burns healed as much as they ever would. Unsi Hopa made a salve from yarrow and beeswax that eased the tightness, and Eliza applied it every night. And over time the scarred skin softened a little, moved a little easier. She would never be unmarked. She wore the marks differently now, not as shame, not as curse, but as evidence. She had survived a fire. She had survived a town. She had walked through winter. The scars were the proof. I touched them for the first time one night that fall. We were in the lodge, the fire low, Kala asleep. She was turned away from me, and the scarred side was up, and the firelight caught the ridged skin, put my hand on her cheek, the rough cheek, the damaged one, and held it there. She went still. "You don't have to," she said. "I know. Most people can't look at it." I'm not most people. I traced the edge of the scar down to her jaw. The skin was different under my fingers. Tighter, smoother in some places, rough in others, like a landscape. "This is part of you. I married all of you." She turned to face me, and her eyes were bright in the firelight, and she didn't say anything. She took my hand from her cheek and held it against her chest, where I could feel her heart, and that was enough. More than enough. More men came in the fall, not the Redbeard kind, soldiers, real ones, true loyal. A patrol of 8 riding through the hills on whatever errand the government had invented that month. They found the valley the way everyone finds hidden things, by accident, and when they rode in, I felt the whole camp tighten like a hand making a fist. Eliza was in the lodge. I told her to stay there. She told me she wouldn't. We had our first real fight in the 30 seconds before I went out to meet the patrol, which was not ideal timing. She won it by the simple method of walking out beside me and standing there, and I was too busy being chief to argue. The lieutenant was young, very young. He looked at me, looked at Eliza, and I saw him try to assemble a story from what he was seeing. A white woman in Lakota dress, scarred, standing next to a chief, not looking like she needed rescuing. "Ma'am," he said, is everything?" "I'm his wife," Eliza said. "I'm here because I choose to be. Your concern is noted but not needed." I loved her immensely in that moment. The lieutenant looked at his sergeant, who was older and wiser, and who shrugged in the way that experienced sergeants shrug, meaning this is above my pay and below my interest. "We're just passing through," the lieutenant said. And unlike the Redbeard, he meant it. They watered their horses and rode on, and that was that, except it wasn't, because word travels. And a white woman living with Lakota in the Black Hills was a story. And stories bring people, some curious, some hostile, some official. Over the next year we had visitors, a minister who wanted to save Eliza's soul, government man who wanted to move us to the reservation, a newspaper writer who wanted to make us a spectacle. I turned them all away, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with the same look I'd given the Redbeard. The look that says I have buried men, and I am willing to bury more. Matoska stood with me each time, as he'd promised, and the camps stood behind us. The government man was the hardest. He came with papers and patience, which is more dangerous than guns. He sat in my lodge and drank the coffee. Eliza made him and talked about the reservation like it was a gift. "Good land," he said. "Rations. Schools for the children, protection." "Protection from what?" I said. He paused. Difficulty of living out here, away from. From you, I said. You mean protection from you. He left the coffee unfinished. He came back twice more, each time with more papers. And the third time Eliza sat beside me and said, in English clear enough that the interpreter wasn't needed, my husband said no. I'm saying no. The people have said no. How many times do you need to hear a word before you understand it? The government man looked at her, at the scars, at the Lakota dress, at the chief's wife, who had once been a Nebraska seamstress, and I think he saw something in that transformation that disturbed him more than anything I could have said. A white woman who had chosen this life over his, who had been thrown out of his world and found a better one. He left and did not come back. The newspaper writer was easier. He wanted a story. I gave him nothing, which is the worst thing you can give a man who wants a story. He invented one anyway. I saw it later, a copy brought by a trader, full of words like captive and savage and tragedy. Eliza read it at the fire, her lips moving, and when she finished, she folded it and fed it to the flames. They spelled your name wrong, she said. They spelled everything wrong. Gradually the visitors came less often and then stopped. We were not worth the trouble. That was the calculation. Shh. And I was glad to be on the right side of it. There is a night I come back to. Not the wedding night, not the night I asked her, not even the night in my mother's lodge, when I said she was my concern. It was an ordinary night in our second winter together. Nothing happened. That's why I remember it. Eliza was sewing by the fire. Tokala was reading aloud from the Bible. He'd gotten good enough that he read to her now, instead of the other way around, and he was proud of this in the way 13-year-olds are proud. Which is to say, he pretended it was nothing. The dog was asleep on my feet, which he did every night regardless of where I positioned myself, and I had given up trying to stop him. I was repairing an arrow. The shaft had cracked near the head, and I was binding it with sinew, a small job that needed just enough attention to keep my hands busy and not enough to take me out of the room. Eliza looked up from her sewing, looked at me. The firelight did its thing on her face, and I saw the scars and the smoothness and the woman underneath both, and she smiled. Not a big smile. The small one, the private one, the one that was only for this lodge and the people in it. What? I said. Nothing. She went back to her sewing. But it wasn't nothing, it was the whole thing. The lodge, the fire, the boy reading, the dog on my feet. The woman who had walked out of a blizzard and into my life and chosen to stay. The ordinary, perfect, ordinary night of a man who had been alone and was not alone anymore. I finished the arrow. I set it aside. I listened to my son read and watched my wife sew, and I sat in the middle of my life like a man sitting in the center, a country he didn't know he owned until he stopped long enough to look around. Years went on. They do. Tokala grew into a young man who could read English and track elk and argue with his grandmother in 2 languages. Eliza became fluent enough in Lakota to tell jokes, which was the real test. Anyone can learn to trade and greet and pray, but a joke requires you to live inside a language, to know where the weightfall falls and where the air is. And when she made my mother laugh for the first time, I knew she had crossed the last line. The camp grew. A few families from other bands found us, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of land that wasn't a reservation. We were 45, then 50. I was chief of 50 people who depended on me to keep the valley safe and fed and free, and the weight of that was considerable, but it was a weight I could carry because I was not carrying it alone. Eliza stood with me. At every council, every decision, every hard night when the food was low, or the soldiers were close, or the sickness was moving through the lodges. She was not Lakota and would never be. And she was not a chief's wife in the way Tawiela had been. She didn't know the old ways from birth, didn't carry the songs in her blood, but she brought what she had, the steadiness, the work, the absolute refusal to break. She had proven against fire and exile and winter, and which I trusted the way I trusted the ground. There was a winter, our 4th, I think, when the sickness came through the camp and took 6 people in 3 weeks. Two were children. One was Unsi Hopa, the old medicine woman, who went quietly in her sleep, which was more than she deserved and exactly what she'd have wanted. The camp was in mourning, and I was in the middle of it, trying to hold things together the way a chief does. With presence, with calm, challenge, with the appearance of knowing what comes next even when you don't. Eliza worked through that winter without stopping. She cooked for the sick. She boiled water and cleaned the lodges where the sickness had been. She sat with the mothers of the dead children, not speaking. She knew enough by then to know that grief in our way is carried in silence, but present, there. A white woman in a Lakota mourning camp, doing the work, saying nothing, being exactly what was needed. When it was over, my mother said to me, "She grieves like one of us." It was the highest thing my mother ever said about anyone. Matoska told me once, late at night, after we had dealt with the dispute between two families that had taken all day and most of our patience. "She makes you better." "She makes everything better," I said. "No, she makes you better, and you make us better so." He shrugged. Matoska shrugs entire philosophies. I am an old man now. I am telling you this from the porch of a cabin that I built with Tokala's help in the valley where I found her. The cabin was Eliza's idea. She said the lodges were fine for her, but her knees were not fine for the lodges. And I laughed, and we built it. The valley is still ours. Not on paper, I am not a fool. I know what paper means to the government and what it doesn't. But ours in the way that matters is that we are here, and we have been here, and we continue to be here. And every year that passes makes it harder for anyone to say otherwise. Eliza is inside. She is making soup, because she always makes soup, and because Tokala, who is 30 now and has children of his own, is coming with his family for the evening meal. The dog is long dead, but there is another dog, a descendant of that first one, same short legs, same torn ear, same loyalty. He is on the porch with me. I look at the valley, the creek, the cottonwoods, the hills going up to timber, the lodges and cabins of my people, smoke rising, children running, horses in the meadow. 53 people, 54, with Eliza. And whatever we are, Lakota and white, old ways and new, fire-scared and standing. We are here. She comes to the door. She has flour on her hair hands, and that look on her face. The one that means she's about to tell me something I've done wrong, or something she needs me to do, and I won't know which until she says it. "The firewood," she says. "I'll get it. You said that an hour ago, and now I'm saying it again. You see? Consistent." She shakes her head. Both sides of her face moving together, the way they do now. The scars so familiar to me that I couldn't draw her face without them. She is beautiful. She has always been beautiful. Town that threw her out was blind, and I have spent 30 years being grateful for their blindness. Because it sent her north, into the snow, into my valley, into my life. I stand up. The dog stands up. I go to get the firewood, because she asked me to, and because the evening is coming and the fire will need feeding, and my son is on his way with his children, and there is soup to be made and a table to be set, and all the ordinary things that make up a life that I did not expect and do not deserve and will not waste. The valley darkens, the first stars come out. I carry the wood inside, and she takes it from me, and her hand touches mine, and it is warm, and I am home.